afternoon of a long weekend. I'm Rob. I'm the CTO of Circle CI. And when I was 10 years old, my parents bought me a guitar. It wasn't this guitar. This was a later addition to my collection. But I started playing the guitar. I had a little acoustic, and I thought I was pretty good. And then eventually, maybe in 10th, 11th grade, somewhere in there, I got an electric guitar. I was in high school bands. We played in clubs around the city of Toronto where I grew up. And we were pretty good. And I decided somewhere around there that my guitar playing was great, but what I really needed for a bit of an edge was a better paint job on my guitar. So I owned basically this guitar right here, this candy apple red Fender Strat, but I was a little bit bored with it, so I dismantled the entire thing, sanded it down completely, and airbrushed a custom graphic onto it. I thought this was a really, really good idea. And I don't know if anyone here has ever dismantled an electric guitar and painted it. I'll assume probably not. But this is kind of what it looks like when you get down to it. This is also not my actual guitar because mine's been painted and I don't have this photograph. But while I was painting it, I thought, you know what? While I'm in here anyway, why don't I just redo the electronics? Because then it will also have an awesome new sound that nobody else has in their guitar, right? Suffice it to say that now I only play the acoustic guitar because the dismantled, re-electronic electric guitar never worked again after that experience. And so I still own this guitar, which is the crazy thing, and you can imagine it's in a case in my basement. It's been moved from Toronto to California in between about 6 or 8 different houses. And shockingly, my wife quite regularly asks me, why do you still own this guitar? It doesn't work. It's unfixable. Why are you carrying it around? And I always excuse it with sentimental value. It's sentimental value. My first electric guitar, I could never give it up. But the reality is, I keep this thing as a reminder to myself that, well, while I'm in here is a terrible, terrible line of thinking. You know what? I'm just going to make this one extra change because I'm in here anyway, and I might as well just do it now, is a road to complete disaster. So a few years after high school, I graduate from college. I start working at this company called the DocSpace Company. Think of it as, I guess Dropbox, except in the 90s, right? So imagine Dropbox without any of the supporting technology to make Dropbox great, and that's what we were building, right? That was the story of a lot of late 90s companies. We're building some really interesting product, but it's all web forms, and you have to upload your files with zero feedback about whether they're actually uploading right now or how long it's going to take, et cetera. But that's what we did. And we were having reasonable success. And in sort of early days, we managed to go out and raise some cash, which is great. And I guess unbeknownst to myself, and I was running what we called systems engineering at the time at DocSpace. And unbeknownst to me, the decision was taken to take a bunch of that money and use it for marketing, which seems like a reasonable idea. We have some money, let's use it to go do some marketing and try to get people to come and use our service. And we bought some email lists. And this is 1999, before spam filters really worked. And so we blasted out to this massive distribution list, hey, come check out our product, it's really great, whatever. And we got massive load. We got a massive upswing in traffic on our site, and that was great. Unfortunately, even the fact that we were doing this was unknown to anyone in the engineering team. And at the time that we did it, our server architecture looked a little bit like this. It was literally this one machine that I had purchased from the local computer shop and was sitting underneath my desk in the office using our late 90s DSL line into the office as the full sort of bandwidth. That was also the source of all our redundancy. And so as you can imagine, it didn't actually go that well. Within minutes, we were getting emails back from the people that we had emailed saying, hey, you should come try out our amazing service. And they're saying, we'd love to, but we can't get to the site. It's just down all the time. It's spitting up errors. And we had zero plan. No idea what it was that we were going to do about this, only that our site was down and this was our architecture, right? So, but we're a bunch of smart people in theory. We're engineers. We know how to solve problems. And so we did a little bit of thinking and a little bit of we'll call it research. And we decided that obviously what we needed was something that looked more like this. And And so we got started. You know what we need to do? We need to order tons of hardware. We need to rack it up in a data center. We need to do all the things that big companies do because we're a big company now. We just grew up and bought a mail list. So obviously, we should get out there and support our product like we're one of the big dogs, let's say. So a little deeper into the stack, this is what we were running on that single box under my desk. It was running on Windows, because that's all any of us knew how to use at the time. We were using IIS, if anybody remembers that. Do we still use that? I'm not sure. JRun, anybody in the room remember JRun? Nice. Live software before it got bought by Alere, before it got bought by Macromedia and became part of Cold Fusion or some crazy thing. It was like the original servlet engine. And we were using the JVM that ran on Windows, which stopped being a thing soon after that, as you can probably imagine, when Microsoft and Sun decided they hated each other. We, in fact, wrote all of our code in Visual J++, which is the greatest Java IDE ever to exist. Unfortunately, it was yanked from Visual Studio after the split of, the breakup, let's say, of Sun and Microsoft. We're using Microsoft SQL Server. Like, this was the straight-up Microsoft stack, obviously, right? It was a file system. We were sharing files, doing secure file transfer and delivery, and everything was on the local hard drive of that one machine under my desk. And of course, it was all that single instance. So we decided that the right thing to do from this stack was to do just a quick upgrade to the following. We would switch to Linux because Linux was cool and that's what everybody was using. We would use Apache with JServe. Again, anybody remember JServe? It was the predecessor to Tomcat, and it was still in alpha at the time that we decided we should obviously switch all of our production systems to that. The Blackdown JVM, which was an open source implementation on Linux that was, well, it was just awful. Oracle 8i. Okay, the I in 8i, for anybody who doesn't know, means internet. So we're like, oh, this is an internet database. That's clearly what we need. NetApp. We bought a terabyte of NetApp. This is awesome. It took up 7 racks in a data center to store 1 terabyte of data. I think I copied my presentation right before this onto a USB key that was a terabyte. And then an F5 big IP, so load balancer. I think we started out with 10 Linux machines racked in a data center, or that was the plan, and so we needed load balancing in front of that. And there was no ELB back then. There was only do-it-yourself, so go buy all this hardware. And so we set out to do this. I think we were maybe 6, 8, 9 engineers, I'm not sure exactly, across operations and software development. And we set out to do this migration as fast as we could. Because that's what you should do. You should change everything and decide to do it as fast as you humanly can, right? So we started work on this. Our plan was about 6 to 8 weeks to execute this migration. And there were a few things in here, i.e. every item on the list that we didn't know anything about. So we had to learn pretty quickly. And one of the big areas was Oracle, right? We had never even seen it before. It's a really expensive piece of software. So we hired a consultant to come in and do the actual data migration of all the data that we had in Microsoft SQL Server and design a migration tool that was going to take it during a downtime into Oracle. And this seemed like a really great idea. And so we get started. We're working away on this. We are fueled entirely by coffee. I still distinctly remember getting up every morning, making a giant, like 12-cup or 16-cup French press full of coffee, and just putting it in a thermos and taking it with me. And that was like how I got to noon. And then we just kept going. We just kept going around the clock for, who knows, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long it took us to get there, right? And so 8 weeks rolls around. Oh, I actually forgot that we deployed Oracle on Solaris. So we added another operating system that we didn't know anything about, running on Sun E4500s with A5200 disk arrays, which I didn't say this out loud, but I was living in Canada at the time. I remember carrying the disks in my luggage into this data center in Reston, Virginia. So we were at Exodus, if anybody remembers that. This was everything, right? We were changing everything at the same time. So we had this consultant working on the Oracle piece. And I guess I was responsible for this entire migration, right, at a high level. But we were working on so many parallel tracks at the time that we just said, OK, you own this thing. Your objective is get this stuff from this database into this database in the same structure. And he says, OK, no problem, I got it, Oracle expert. So 8 weeks later, we jump on a plane. There's maybe 4 or 5 of us, not including the Oracle expert. We jump on a plane, we fly down to Virginia, a few extra disk drives in our backpacks, and head to the data center, right? So on a Saturday morning, we tell all of our customers, hey, we've got this downtime, we're going to do this migration. It's going to take maybe 10 hours because we need to do a data transfer, out of our office under the desk in Toronto, down here, and then run all the migrations and everything, right? So we start the data transfer, we shut down the site, and we're racking boxes now, just like cleaning everything up, making sure the load balancer is in place, like doing all the other stuff that we have to do physically in the data center, connecting cables while we're waiting for this data transfer to come down. We get the files, and for the first time in this entire process, we actually look at the migration tool that we're supposed to be running, and like an email with instructions on what we're supposed to do. The instructions, they don't even make sense. Like, there is nothing about this migration looking at it that makes sense to us, and we're like, okay, well, let's try to break this down and follow it. Of course, it's Saturday. We can't get in touch with the guy who wrote it. And we try to execute this thing, and it has never been tested on production data. And so the data set that we pull down has hundreds of edge cases that are not handled by our migration tool. We're down, right? We've got the status page up saying, hey, we're going to be back in 10 hours when this migration is done or whatever. And we probably spent the next 24 hours trying to get the tool that we had to handle the edge cases that we had found in our data set. And at that point, we realized that the tool, like the actual was Oracle PL/SQL type of script, wasn't even capable of processing the type of data that we needed to migrate. So we had to start from scratch. So now it's like Sunday night, and we are starting to build a brand new migration tool for our site that is down to move the data into this Oracle database. We're ripping out chunks of our code base, using them with JDBC connectors to build like a streaming pipe that's going to pull stuff out of one data set and into the other and do the translations on the fly. It takes us probably 2 to 3 days to build it and get it working correctly, and another 2 to run it, because we have to pull all this data and churn it on the fly, and we're using these, it's a 1999 laptop, who knows exactly what its capabilities were. Along the way, we became very good friends with chocolate-covered espresso beans. This was how we got through this entire time. If no one has ever slept in a data center by putting their head on one of the computer shelves and just rested for 2 hours while the other person worked, you really haven't lived. I also remember distinctly sleeping in a parking spot in the parking lot by using the curb, the little bumper curb, as a pillow. Not super cushy, I would not get one for home, but that was the state of affairs that we were in from the course of effectively Saturday to Thursday. We finally brought the site back up on Thursday afternoon. We lost a lot of customers along the way, as you can probably imagine, and a lot of sleep. And as I described previously, we came into this thing completely exhausted, right? We burned the midnight oil for 6 or 8 weeks, had nothing left to give. We're going to get down there, we're going to turn this thing on, it's going to be amazing, we're going to go. And then we had to pull out another 7 days or 6 days of just relentless work, right? So what's fascinating to me about this story, well, there's lots of things that fascinate me about this story, but this is 1999, and at the same time, a guy by the name of Kent Beck wrote this book, right? Extreme Programming Explained. And I think the programming we were doing was pretty extreme, but I don't think it's what he meant when he titled this book or the methodology of extreme programming. And so what is he trying to tell us in here? He's, one, embrace change. Okay, well, we embraced way too much change at once, for sure. But 2, taking things on in small increments, testing and learning as you go, writing tests before you write code. All of these things we didn't touch, right? And I think we actually read this book a little bit after this set of affairs, this complete disaster of a migration that we thought was going to be great, and still didn't accept it. We looked at it and we said, writing tests before I write code, I don't even have time to write code. How is that possibly going to work? pair programming, I can't get my code done when I'm working on it myself. I can't go sit and watch someone else write their code, right? And so this inability to connect the dots, I think, is really interesting to me. And I try to look at what the state of the company was at the time as well, that we, that we had this mindset, like there's this massive pressure to get code out the door and less pressure to, to ship something that's good, less understanding of what the impact of how you build something will be down the road on how that thing gets used. And I'm not even sure that that pressure was explicit, like coming down from upper management. I think a lot of it was implicit. We just had this notion that you needed to deliver software quickly, and that was all that mattered. You needed to make changes quickly, but the net result was obviously a massive failure on us, a massive failure for our customers. And so we read this book. We basically said, that guy's crazy. We're never going to do that. This is 1999, right? So fast forward a couple years, and actually, I guess late 2000, DocSpace, the previous company, was acquired by Critical Path. I don't know if anyone remembers Critical Path. This is a later logo. I just like the fact that every rebranding ends up with like a dark gray and green. And so I went with this one. So we get acquired in there, and join that company. We're going to integrate our product, but we're also working on some other things. And Critical Path was a global hosted email provider. We had customers you've probably heard of, like AltaVista, ICQ, E-Trade, like big companies, and we were operating their email for them. That platform was written before I got there, but the original platform was written mostly in Perl. So much Perl. Mod Perl front end, Perl data translations, and a hacked Qmail to manage the actual mail system in the back end. But when I arrived, they were just killing a project that was called CPNG, so Next Generation Critical Path. And the whole goal of this project was to take this Perl code base and rewrite the entire thing in C++, because that would be better. There was no actual sort of customer product justification for this action. It was just something they were going to do. And I think, so we're going to rewrite this whole thing in C++ because C++ is better, right? So finally, someone with some authority showed up and said, what exactly is it that this engineering team is doing? Let's not do that. Let's not take our entire platform and rewrite the entire thing in C++. So, OK, that worked for a second. So then, I'm just going to keep advancing and see what happens here. Nothing. So that was canceled, and the decision was made to instead just write an improved version of the current platform. And that was going to be called Platform V2. And so the work started on Platform V2, but again, it was an engineering project, and it was focused very much on tooling and an improved version of this hacked Qmail, an improved version of giant piles of Perl, right? And that sounded really great. But at the same time that Critical Path had acquired DocSpace, they had acquired another company called Isocore, and Isocore built on-prem mail servers, right? So basically the same thing that we had already built, they had one that was designed for large ISPs and telcos and stuff like that. And there was a political influence effectively saying, we shouldn't be writing a totally different version of this for hosting, our SaaS offering, application service provider, whatever we called it back then. We shouldn't be writing that when we already have this really great mail server that scales, et cetera. And so we should rewrite our entire platform, rebuild our entire platform to use this product that we just acquired. And so that was going to be Platform V3. So now we've had NG, V2, and we're on to V3, but no one's written any code. Or actually, we've written a ton of code, but nothing's actually gone anywhere, right? There's just discussion about architecture. We're going to build V3, right? And V3 is going to be based off this Isocore mail platform. It's going to be amazing. Finally, 6 months into that project, maybe 12, I don't know, we're making a lot of Gantt charts. Every week we get together and review the Gantt charts so that we can change the dates on the Gantt charts, but no one's actually writing any software. We realized that that was way too much to take on, and so now we have nothing, whatever. And so we're going to build Platform V 2.1, which if you were ever a basic developer, you would find really cool because they've managed to find a way to slide in between the versions. There was never a V2, there was never a V3, but now we're building Platform V 2.1, which is the actual thing that we're going to build. I think we're 3 years into the project at this point. I'm not totally sure. And we actually start building some code. And this, luckily, I got moved off onto something else. I'm just going to ignore that. And so we're finally building product. We're finally getting product out the door. And so, OK, this is like the only slide that I was actually going to show that had writing on it. But anyway, that is 2003. Around 2001, a bunch of smart people, Kent Beck included from the previous book, got together and wrote the Agile Manifesto. Does everybody know what the Agile Manifesto is? Cool. It would be on this. Oh, look at that. So really focusing on individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. Here's the word change again, right? And again, we took on a bunch of change, but we took it on in this really crazy way of like, we're going to build something massive and then realize it's wrong and then build something else massive. And so again, looking back at this, like what was the failure there? The failure was there was no organizational support for doing things quickly. It was all top down. This is a mandate. You're going to use this new piece of software that we purchased because politically that's the right thing to do. We're not going to slowly iterate. We ended up with a slightly modified version of the original platform after all of that work. But we put in a ton of work to get there. That really didn't, oh, OK, yeah. So, but we really didn't do it in a very smart way. We wasted a ton of time getting there. And so the response to that was not, hey, look, some really smart people thought about Agile, and we should go look at that and figure out if that's something we should do. It was, obviously, what we need is more Gantt charts. We need to do more design up front. We need to write bigger documents. We're going to have marketing requirements documents, and then product requirements documents, and then technical requirements documents. We're going to plan everything up front so that we don't make a big mistake like this again, which is exactly the opposite of the response that this would say that you should have. And again, this is years after people have started thinking about these things. So has anyone here heard of Kobo, e-reading platform? So a few years later, now this is 2008, I go to work at a company called Kobo, and we are building digital reading, right? We're building mobile apps, back-end, web, plus an e-reader. And at some point in here, we decide that we need to do a bunch of work. Obviously, we're releasing a new version of all of our apps, some new capabilities. And we set out to do that and use a continuous integration model. So every team, if you're on the iOS team or if you're on the Android team, you were doing integration of the code on your team. Unfortunately, all of those teams needed to change the APIs that were provided by the backend, and that was the same API that was being provided for the web interface. And those sets of changes each occurred on their own branch. So the iOS team had a branch of the backend that they were doing continuous integration on, but again, all against this topic branch that was specifically to support them. So I think we're in 2009 at this point in terms of when this project is happening. They get to the end of this project, and everything is great except for everybody's changed the APIs. And now they need to integrate all of those changes, and that integration took 3 months. I think the whole work for this thing was 3 months, and then 3 months to just integrate the APIs. And so what was really interesting to me there is that team was really, really smart. They were very focused. They had management down, support to take on smart development activities. I think they just didn't have the right information. So that particular team, I'm from Toronto, I think I mentioned that. That team was in Toronto. I was working with them at the time. And I think they just were not exposing themselves to how things were changing. They knew a little bit about continuous integration and were doing it at a team level. They weren't doing it overall, and that cost them really heavily. So I love this quote because, for a couple reasons. Because it's always true. Regardless of what generation of software development you're working on, this quote is basically always true. Software development is full of best practices, which are often talked about but seem to be rarely done. And if you look at it's kind of intentionally really small there, but the link here, it's from Martin Fowler, and the name of this article is original continuous integration.html. So he posted that article in 2000. This project blew up in 2009. In 2006, he rewrote the article, which is now continuous integration.html, because the original one, everybody has this. Everybody's got this figured out by now. So in 2006, I'm going to rewrite it for an audience that really understands and is doing continuous integration. Yet here we are in 2009 with a project failing because we're not doing continuous integration, right? So I think there's a real sign in there of how far off we are and a real question about why are we having all these conversations at a high level? Why are so many smart people thinking about these problems, but then smart people who go and try to implement are failing to learn from or adopt these practices? OK, so a few years later, I finally have a success story. This is great. I'm so excited. In 2011, I founded a company called Copious with two other folks, myself, well, I wasn't one of the other folks. So myself, a guy named Jim Rose, and a guy named Jonathan Ehrlich. And Jim is now the CEO of CircleCI, where I'm the CTO. So we've been at this a long time together. But we started out building a social marketplace. And the idea was basically to find the intersection of growing and scaling through social, but finding monetization through a marketplace. It was a peer-to-peer marketplace. And, well, whatever, great idea. Seemed like a great idea at the time. And so as we were just starting to build, Jim says to me, so Jim's a product guy by background. He says to me, I think we should do continuous deployment. And I said, you're crazy. Deploying is risk, right? If I put something out into production, that's a big, scary event. And doing that more often just means I'm pulling more all-nighters. That was my initial reaction to that, right? And I went home, though. So he sent me some links to people who had been talking about this. And so I went home and read some of those things and came in the next morning and was like, yes, we're going to do continuous deployment. And the reason that I was able to get there so quickly was that, the descriptions were very clear and articulate about what you were trying to achieve, which is really risk mitigation, right? I'm trying to chop down the size of every deployment to the point where the amount of risk associated with that, the all-nighter goes away because everybody understands that small change that we're pushing out, and if anything happens, we can roll it back, like all the things that we now understand about continuous deployment. But the second reason was that I already had failed so many times that I had the scar tissue, effectively, to say, yeah, this makes sense to me, right? That was the first time that I read one of these things and said, OK, I can connect the dots because this has happened so many times, right? On the other hand, in a couple years earlier, in 2009, a gentleman, Timothy Fritz from IMVU posted one of the first articles about continuous deployment. And this is actually from the follow-up, where he quoted some of the Hacker News comments on his original article, or maybe they were comments from the blog post itself. So these are great. Maybe this is just viable for a single developer, but your site is going to be down a lot, right? This is what smart developers who write software every day are thinking about continuous deployment when someone starts talking about it. This one's, yeah, they're also very nice, these people, I find. Hacker News comments are a great place to get really positive feedback. It seems like the author either has no customers or very understanding customers. I doubt that the author actually believes what he's writing here. Like, this person took the time to write an article about how you can improve your process, and your response is, you don't even believe that. So how could I possibly believe what you're telling me? So for once, we're doing it right. We started out 2011. We're doing continuous deployment out of the gate. When new hires come into Copious, they ship code on the first day. They don't go home until they've shipped something into production. So you come in and you are just, this is how we ship code. We're shipping, we're shipping, we're shipping. Every day I just get stuff into production, right? This feels amazing. So awesome success, finally. Except, are we shipping the right code? So we're a marketplace. I explained that. It's peer-to-peer. I buy something from you. You ship it to me. Or you, oh yeah, not in the context of shipping code, but like you put it in a box and you send it to me. And if you've ever tried to build a peer-to-peer marketplace, this is one of the big challenges. Getting people to go to the to the UPS or whatever, put the stuff in a box and mail it to somebody. So we wanted to try prepaid shipping, which is basically there's a flat rate for the thing that you're going to get or going to ship, and you'll get a box sent to you, and you just put your stuff in it, and you leave it on your doorstep, and everything magically works, right? So that sounds great. So the product manager who was working on this sat down to figure out how to do it. And was like, okay, well, who can provide us with prepaid shipping? It's better to use a provider, a third-party provider, than to build something yourself. So we ended up doing a partnership with Stamps.com. I don't even know if they still exist, but they had this great API that we could integrate to and order these boxes and whatever. I think it was, hopefully not Corba, but I actually think it was SOAP, even though it was 2012 or whatever. And so we head down this path of building this integration. I think the total integration took us like 3 months. Because once you involve a third-party vendor, everything slows down, right? The process of getting software out, like even if we're able to iterate and ship every day, you can't get software out that quickly when now you have to work with a third-party vendor, you've got contracts to sign, you've got who's responsible for what in the cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. About a week before we actually put this thing into production and announced it, one of our competitors launched prepaid shipping. I don't know how this always happens that everybody's working on the same thing at the same time. I think it's because it's just really the obvious evolution of your project. Lots of people will believe, oh, they heard something from someone or whatever, or someone said we were going to do it, and so they thought about it. But their version of prepaid shipping was they put a text box on the checkout that said, let us know if you want a box and tell us what the address is. I mean, the address is already in the form, and we'll send it to you. And if you checked that box, they would, in their office, print out a label or maybe even handwrite it, take that box and mail it to you, and you had prepaid shipping. That implementation took them, I'm guessing, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And our implementation was at 3 months and not shipped, right? So about a year before we started working on this book came out. I think a few of you probably read it. And we had read it. And this is a great book. It tells you a lot about how to move quickly and whatever. But we had internalized that as moving quickly, shipping code quickly. And we talk about that a lot. Like, how can I get my cycle time down? How can I get this idea that I had today into production tomorrow? But if you're not building the right piece of technology, the right piece of software, then the thing that you're shipping, you can spend a lot of time and energy quickly shipping the wrong things, right? So you're still not moving as fast as your competitors. And I will say that story sticks with me because that company eventually, we were built out the Facebook platform. Facebook platform kind of went away at the same time, but we hadn't reached escape velocity as a business. We hadn't really found our business because we were moving slowly from a product perspective. And the day that you have to have the conversation with all of your friends, when you're working in a startup this big, most of the people that work for you are friends of yours. They were doing something else, and you convinced them to leave their stable job and come work for you on your rocket ship to success. And the day you sit down with all your close friends and tell them that they don't have a job anymore is a very, very self-reflective day where you sit down and think about, how do I actually build a business? How do I succeed in this space? And for me, that was that day. So I always look back on that. And what's interesting still is now a lot of other startups will come and ask me to, hey, I'm starting this company. Can you give me some advice? Can you help me understand? And I'm always willing to help. Although I do find it a little bit frustrating because it's always the same experience. So they'll say, oh, you're the CTO of this startup. Can you tell me, should I use Rails or should I use Node.js? Like, I've heard good things about Rails and I've heard good things about Node.js. And I'm like, hold on. What are you building? Oh, well, I'm going to build this business, and it's going to do this thing, whatever. It's always something different, of course. And I've found these outsourced developers, and they said for only $50,000 they can build this thing, but they want to use Ruby. And I found this other shop, and it's $60,000, and they use Node. And we took some money out of our mortgage, and we're going to put that into this thing. I'm like, have you ever heard of Unbounce? No, I don't know anything. Does anyone know what Unbounce is, by the way? So Unbounce is landing pages, right? Customized landing pages. I think you spend $3 and about 20 minutes, and you can make a landing page, right, with your own custom domain. And you can put up on there some field that's like, coming soon, my business, whatever your business might be, right? Put your email here if you are interested in hearing about it when it launches. Total investment, 1 hour plus $4, right? which is less than $50,000 that you just took out of your mortgage. And so what's great about this, if you haven't seen a company launch like this, I'm sure you have, you just didn't realize that that's what they're doing. What's great about this is for that $4 investment, if nobody puts their email address in, you can move on to the next $4 investment, right? You can understand that quickly, and you can do this for launching a company, you can do this for launching a feature, you can do this for some new capability that you're building into your product. It doesn't have to be a custom landing page like this. At Copious, after the whole fallout from the prepaid shipping, we started putting up buttons to nowhere, right? Click this button if you would like to use this feature that we just launched. And you would click on it and it would say, oh, something went wrong. We're looking into it right now. That was the entire functionality. It took us about 8 seconds to build, and we could count up how many people clicked on it, and if no one clicked on it, or if only a few people clicked on it, then we were done, right? We moved on to the next feature. We didn't actually have to implement. So now it's really about, how do I build the right thing? What's crazy about that in this particular sort of startup advisor thing is those are people that are actively seeking advice. They came to me and said, I want to know how to do this right, and I told them exactly how to do it right, and they ignored me anyway and went and did something else. And so I just feel like there's this connection that's always missing between the kind of high-level thinking and the actual implementation and how we adopt. Do I need to review Plato's Cave for anyone? So this is how I feel about this, right? So the story or the allegory of the cave from Plato in 1 minute or less is basically you have people who are chained inside a cave and they spend their whole life there and all they ever see is shadows on the wall. And so that's their view of reality, right? And then one of them escapes, is freed, and goes out into the real world. And actually in the real version of the story, at first they're blinded by the light of the outside, which is particularly relevant here. But they get outside, they start to see that actually it's not just shadows on a wall, that there's like really horses and there's really trees and there's really life out there. And then they come back to tell their friends in the cave, and the friends in the cave think they're nuts, right? And so, and they even violently fight against being freed because they don't want to deal with this crazy person who's just come back. And I feel like this conversation about methodologies and adoption is really like this. Like, we stand at the top, maybe, if you're a leader of a team or whatever, and say, oh yeah, I know about this, you need to do it. And the team is just like, I don't get it. I don't get how that applies to me, and so I don't know how to put it in place in my day-to-day life. Whether that's a team that you manage, a company you advise, whatever it is, really embracing that and understanding it takes something more. And so the biggest takeaway that I've had from this is that we're a sum of our experiences, right? Everything we know is a result of the things that we've done. Like, how many times in your life has someone told you that something is a terrible idea, but you did it anyway, and you're like, oh, I really should have listened to that person. That was a terrible idea. But we just don't embrace and really digest these things when they're told to us. And so from a developer perspective, whether it's you or whether it's your team, the reality is you have to fail. You have to fail. You have to teach your team to fail. And you need to have, in order to create a culture that's going to move quickly, a culture that's going to embrace it. We spent a lot of time at this conference talking about tooling, but a culture that's going to embrace those tools and really use them well. You need to embrace moving quickly and failing as a result. To the point, and a lot of people pay lip service to failing, but to the point where you should be promoting in your organization the engineers who fail. You should have all hands where you discuss, this person tried this thing and failed, and we're super stoked about that because we learned something, and now we're going to do something better, right? And the promotion path for engineers within your organization, for other people in your organization, will be based on, do you take risks and do you fail? Because anything less than that doesn't actually support that that is the culture you're trying to create, right? So how did we fail along the way here? We failed because we didn't have the right information, so you need to get your team, you need to go out, you need to get your team out seeing other points of view from other parts of the world, right? You need to let them try things themselves. You need to give them room to try new things, right? Room to experiment, room to fail, and to learn and to internalize those things along the way. Because I can stand up here and tell you about all the horrible catastrophes that I had, but they're not going to look like the ones that you're about to have, right? First of all, hopefully you're not migrating data centers in 2017, but you need to give people that room to fail themselves, and so you'll never stop them from failing. So the best you can do is guide them or guide yourself, if it's your work, into the smallest possible failure so you can learn quickly and then develop from that. All right. That's all I have. I think I have like 60 seconds for questions or something, is that? Yeah. Any questions? All right. Well, there goes our 60 seconds. Oh, yeah.
How do you convince people to change their mentality? You mentioned you go to a group, you tell them what to do. They usually don't do it, or...
Oh, yeah, in terms of like a startup, advising a startup or something like that. Well, that's a really tough one. As I said, I continue to have that conversation. I think it's much easier in a larger organization where the reality is you need to create the space for someone to fail. But what frustrates me in those particular examples is that person is just taking, either they like literally taken money, they've taken a second mortgage, they've taken money from friends and family, and they're about to spend it on something that's not going to return. And I feel very uncomfortable saying, okay, go ahead and fail. Like, go take that 50K, because no one's going to give you more after that, right? And so you have to create basically an opportunity for them to try it at smaller scale, but that is just being compelling, being convincing, right? Like, and using examples. So the other thing is the stories matter, right? If I can hear other people's stories about what worked and what didn't, or how they failed, then hopefully I can internalize some of that and reduce the number of ways that I'm going to fail. And that's part of just getting out there and hearing other people's views. But yeah, I haven't been super successful at it so far. I've watched a number of people go down this path and continue to fail. Yeah. I think that's probably, is that it? Any more questions? I think it's time anyway. Cool, thank you.